Okay, second lecture for the Gilded Age. This is called Philosophies of Big Business. During this time period in the late 1800s, businesses thrived. We saw some of the first major industrial giants grow up in America, in the steel industry, in the oil industry. By the time you get to 1900, almost every production industry in America has been monopolized into a single entity. The rise of monopolies of big business. How did this happen? Well, in the late 1800s, there were several ideas, several philosophies that people put into place that led to this. I always like to preface this lecture with this idea of how do you sleep at night? When Rockefeller or Carnegie were incredibly wealthy, living in opulent mansions, and yet you had poor Americans crowded in cities, living in row houses and tenements and barely making ends meet, you might look at those wealthy individuals and you say, how do you sleep at night? And they had to answer that. They had to have a philosophy in their mind that said, hey, this is right. This is justified. I've earned what I've got, and you haven't. And so, what are the ideas or the philosophies that kind of justified, at least in the Gilded Age, in their minds, this huge gap? Now, when we get to the end, we're going to obviously have to make our opinion and our judgment on if this was beneficial, harmful, to what extent, and do we feel like this was justified. But five philosophies or five key terms that I'm going to want you to know: laissez-faire government, vertical integration, horizontal integration, social Darwinism, and the gospel of wealth. I'm going to quickly explain each philosophy and show you a cartoon, and then when we get to the end, we'll try to make our judgments. Laissez-faire government. This is the idea that big business leaders felt that government's role in the economy was to take a hands-off policy, to not get involved and make business hard. They wanted as little government regulation as possible. If the government's not coming in and telling me how to run my business, I can now compete freely. Now, I put that word compete in italics because it's going to come up again and again. Did these guys really compete? What is fair competition? But big businesses said, look, it's government's job to help the economy to run as efficiently as possible. And the way to do that is not get involved. Little regulation. Don't tell me how to keep my workers safe. Don't tell me how to pay my workers. Don't tell me how to protect the environment. Just let me run my business and make as much profit as possible. That's laissez-faire government. It's very open to corruption or bribery, because if representatives and senators start to get the idea from their constituents that we need to enact certain safety measures or regulations, now big business can come in and say, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of money for your campaign. We're going to help you get reelected. Just don't get in our way. That's laissez-faire government. Here's a cartoon. It's called What a Funny Little Government. This is John D. Rockefeller, and you can see he's kind of stuffing this kind of political building here with money. But notice what's going on in the background. You've got all of this pollution and corruption going on. So it says the trust giant's point of view. This is how Rockefeller sees it. Vertical integration. Okay, this is a business practice, and it's a smart business practice. It's a way, if you're running a business, how can I make the most profits? I put on there competition versus combination. These big businesses, they like to say that they were competing, but competition is messy. If you compete, you can lose. If you compete, you might waste your resources. It's not efficient. What's efficient is not competing, it's combining. And in vertical integration, what a business realizes is if I can combine all steps of the production process, I can maximize my profits. Carnegie is the best example of this. He is going to develop the monopoly in the steel industry. At first, it's out of Pittsburgh. That's why we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. He operates the Homestead Steel Plant. Eventually, he sells it to J.P. Morgan, and it becomes known as U.S. Steel. But here's what he realized. If you look at all of the steps in the in the process of making steel. Well, you have the minerals in the ground. You then have a mining company that has to excavate and get those minerals out of the ground. Once you get those minerals out of the ground, you have to get those transported somewhere, at that time on the railroad, to a plant, to a steelmaking plant. And then once you've converted and turned those minerals into steel, you now have to distribute that out to different ventures to build more railroads or to build skyscrapers. Carnegie realizes that, you know what, if at any one stage of that production process, if I don't own the other parts of it, I have to pay them. So say he's got his steelmaking plant. Well, if he doesn't own the railroad, if he doesn't own the mining company, if he doesn't own the mineral rights, he's having to pay for those. Those are high costs. He can minimize his costs if he buys up or combines with those different parts of the production process. This is a pathway to monopolizing an industry. The reason that Carnegie was able to become the top seller of steel in America is because he vertically integrated his company. He was using his railroads, his mining companies, his plants, and his mineral rights. This picture here is called the Modern Colossus of Railroads. This is actually one of the Vanderbilts, who were also good because they realized that in order for business to thrive, transportation was such a key part of it, and they vertically integrated into other companies through transportation. And here, this Vanderbilt guy, he's kind of pulling the strings like a marionette. Another philosophy or another pathway to monopoly, horizontal integration. Again, this idea of competition versus combination. Horizontal integration says that I'm going to eliminate or merge with all of my competitors at a single stage of the production process. Okay, so Rockefeller is going to be the best example of this. It says down here, what he did is he monopolized the refining stage of oil production. Here's what this means. If Rockefeller had vertically integrated the oil business, that means he would have had to find some oil rights. He would have had to construct oil derricks, and he would have had to drill. And then once he had drilled the crude oil, he would have to transport that, and then he would have to refine it. For Rockefeller, that was too much work. He's like, there's a lot of waste, there's a lot of cost. What he realized is he said all oil, in order to be useful, has to be refined. So rather than monopolizing all parts of the production process, he just monopolized the refining stage. What this meant is he took his refineries into small communities and he undercut their prices, meaning that he would sell his refined kerosene for lower prices than the small mom and pop shops. Eventually, when those small shops were about to go out of business, they would either be eliminated or made a deal where they would merge into what's called Standard Oil. And that's where he got his name. He wanted to control that entire stage of the production process. This idea of horizontal integration takes place all the time today. Like if you look up Coca-Cola, and you'll see all the little brands that have been merged into and absorbed into like a major company. We see this with cell phone providers. We see this with retailers that they horizontally integrate and eliminate or merge with their smaller competitors. Sorry. Fourth term, social Darwinism. Again, this question of how do you sleep at night? Social Darwinism was a philosophy that justified great disparities of wealth. What they did is they applied the biological principle of survival of the fittest to social and economic systems. So Darwin's Origin of Species came out in 1859, and it said, look, when you've got the gene pool, the strongest characteristics and the strongest traits reproduce and move on, and the weaker ones, the ones that are not fit to survive, are go extinct. They die out. Many people said, why is it any different when we talk about the oil industry or the steel industry or just society in general? The people that get rich are the people that genetically or just talent-wise have earned it or deserve it. Um, and the people whose company goes out of business or end up poor or destitute, well, they just weren't strong enough. This is kind of like the law of the jungle, and it does make some sense. The problem is it does lead to and or confirm existing ethnocentric or racial prejudices. Of course, who are these guys who are getting super rich? Well, they're just generally white males. And who are the people who are struggling? A lot of times it was sharecroppers or immigrant factory workers, and people just said, see, they would just say, see, look, this one race is better than the other. And so while social Darwinism might sound good in terms of just merit-based meritocracy, survival of the fittest, it was actually kind of a clothing for ethnocentric or racial prejudices. This cartoon here kind of shows you, it's called the American Beauty Rose. And of course, this is Rockefeller Standard Oil. In order for it to get to the top and blossom, all these other blooms or blossoms had to be killed off. If you look closely, they're kind of like skulls. All right. The Gospel of Wealth. This is the last one. And again, at some point, people like Carnegie or Rockefeller had to answer for their great wealth and then the great poverty of others. This philosophy, it gained fame because Carnegie wrote an essay. I believe it was in 1889, and it was called The Gospel of Wealth. It has three main ideas. He says, look, kind of like a divine right. God has made some individuals more, he has given some individuals great talents or opportunities. Those people then have a duty or a responsibility to get rich. And then finally, once these talented people have fulfilled their God-given duty to get rich, they have a responsibility to give back to the public good. Now, what this does not mean, Carnegie or Rockefeller, they did not believe in giving money to individuals. Oh, you're down on your luck. Oh, you're homeless. They didn't give handouts. What they believed was taking their money and giving it to governments and societal structures that would improve people's way of life. So libraries, universities, colleges. In many cases, Carnegie and Rockefeller, they were poor as kids and they worked themselves up. You could call it the rags to riches story. They believed that's what other people should do too. They didn't believe in just artificially bringing somebody from the bottom to the top, but we'll give a lot of money to a library, to a music hall, to a university. All of these tycoons gave large endowments to universities. Rockefeller, the University of Chicago, Carnegie Mellon University. And of course, they also did lots of good works through the Rockefeller Foundation or other charitable donations, philanthropic donations. So there's Andrew Carnegie sprinkling $100 million for the public good. We still see this today. Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation, the Facebook guy, Zuckerberg, and some of his initiatives, these guys have made billions of dollars, and they are doing good things with that. So the final question, the judgment that you're going to have to make is, what about the public good? These philosophies, laissez-faire, vertical integration, horizontal integration, social Darwinism, the gospel law, they were incredibly important to the growth of business and American industry. And they helped the average American too. Don't hear me not saying that the standard of living for average Americans was improving. Cost of goods was getting cheaper. Utilities were becoming more accessible. So these philosophies lead to incredible growth and benefits, but at what cost? Do the pros outweigh the cons? And that's something for you to investigate and make a judgment on. If you want to see all these philosophies played out in a cartoonish way, my kids love this. It's YouTube, the Lorax, How Bad Can I Be? Pay attention to the words and you'll see like all of this stuff is getting talked